Welcome everyone to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Wednesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Coming up on the show, the trade deadline in Major League Baseball is behind us. A pound-for-pound greats next fight is ahead of us. Plus, a look at how the rankings have changed in the CFL and in the UFC, and some lessons learned in the WWE. All of that coming up on the show today. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get to it. So, Major League Baseball's trade deadline is now behind us, and so today, very typical sports radio talk segment alert, but we are looking at the winners and losers of the trade deadline, and we start with the team that this podcast focuses on quite a bit, and that would be the Toronto Blue Jays. I think that the Kikuchi trade alone makes them a winner of this trade deadline period, that they were able to turn a couple of months of Yusei Kikuchi into two fringe major league ready prospects, and one that could come up by the end of the year and play a role in things in 2025 is a really, really good move. And if you guys have listened to this show or watched this show for any length of time, you know that I am not one to just heap praise on the front office for the Toronto Blue Jays, but they did what they needed to do. They moved out a lot of pending UFAs and got back, I think, decent returns on all of them. I don't know if any of it is shape-shifting for next year. I do think that there is still going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to get ready for the 2025 season, but I do think that the Blue Jays were able to go out and make the moves that they needed to make to try to at least start to turn this thing around and try to build up a prospect pool that had severely been drained to not much return when you look at how things are going on the big league roster. But overall, a front office that I didn't know if they should be in charge of the trade deadline did a pretty good job at the trade deadline. I would still fire everyone, but they're winners on this week. Next, the Baltimore Orioles, and I think they made a few really smart moves. I had said before, after they made the Eflin trade, I wanted one more big move from Baltimore, and I don't think that really came, but they did accumulate really well with Eflin, Rogers, Sir Anthony Dominguez, one of the best names in the sport, and Soto boosting a pitching staff, and Eloy Jimenez adding more pop to a lineup that maybe didn't need it, but helping to add some depth to this team. They did some of the things that they absolutely needed to do. And this wasn't last year where Baltimore just kind of, well, let's see what we have here. No, that they went out, they still didn't give up any of their major name prospects, and they came in and did a really good job, I think, of adding the players that they needed to add. So good job on the Baltimore Orioles. Another selling team that ends up in the winner column is the Tampa Bay Rays. They were hanging around in this playoff race, but they kind of understood if we are going to make a bigger push at this, then there are a few names that maybe need to go and we'll stock up. And they hit it out of the park. I think they did well on the Eflin trade. They did really well on the Paredes trade. They did well basically across the board, and it seemed like they really maximized what they were doing. And I think they also recognized that it was a seller's market, and so they went out and pivoted where a lot of teams would be kind of grasping to hold on to relevancy. They didn't do that, and I think it was really smart of them to see where the market was going and take full advantage of it. The Philadelphia Phillies are a winner. They only get a couple of players. They kind of only needed a couple of players, but they were both impacts, with Carlos Estevez adding a high leverage relief pitcher to that bullpen. That was already a really good bullpen, but just strengthening a strength. And Austin Hayes wasn't cracking things out in Baltimore. I think that this is going to be, again, a good power bat that helps out the Philadelphia Phillies in their push to a division crown and then some. They have World Series aspirations. They have a very good pitching staff now, maybe the best bullpen in all of baseball, and they have added some pop to their lineup. So they get a winner for me. And the last winner I have, the Seattle Mariners. They added the bats they needed to with Randy Rosarena, and Justin Turner. They were never going to turn into the Bronx Bombers or anything like that, but they were able to kind of assess what they needed and make a big move to get a Rosarena, to get Turner, and continue to build what is a strong pitching staff. by adding Jimmy Garcia to that bullpen, but now you have a couple of bats that can deliver in big situations when you need them to, in this playoff race and into the postseason for the Mariners. Couple honorable mentions, the big clubs, the Yankees and the Dodgers. The Yankees, they get Jazz Chisholm. He has 4 home runs in 3 games at the time of this recording. So obviously an impactful move. I couldn't put them into the full-on winners category because I thought that they needed a couple more impact arms in that bullpen than they got. Well, we'll see what Mark Leiter can end up being, and a couple of the other kind of fringy moves that they made, but I thought they needed one more bigger move to really help solidify things. And I think the Dodgers fall into this category as well. They go out and get Flaherty, so the pitching staff is going to be insane. And they add Kevin Kiermaier for a bit of defensive depth. So they didn't have a real need, but that's a good move to go out and get. So they get an honorable mention on the winner's side. As for the losers, the Houston Astros have to be a loser in my books. They, I think, wildly overpaid for the services of Yusei Kikuchi. And then you see what the Mariners were able to do in really addressing a need that they had. So this is, I think, a kind of twofold on the Houston Astros. The team that you were competing with got a lot better. And right now, paid a pretty penny to go out there and just bring in someone who, if everyone's healthy, is your 3 or 4 starter in a playoff series. Up next, the Chicago White Sox. They didn't sell any of their big ticket items, and the items that they did sell, they didn't get nearly enough back for. And so now, when you look at what you can be selling with the Chicago White Sox to your fan base, it's not hope, because you don't have like this young prospect pool coming, and it's not results because the team is actually worse than it was before. And like, yes, you can still get in the offseason a good return for Crochet and a good return for a Luis Robert, and I will be putting both of those players on target lists for the Toronto Blue Jays for next season if they want to go out and make a splash. But for right now, this team is in a worse spot than they were going into this trade deadline, where you now have lost some of these pieces that you are looking to move, and you didn't get adequate return for them. So you don't even have these young prospects that you can get excited about moving forward. So that is a real blow, I think, to the Chicago White Sox. The Detroit Tigers get a loss in this as well, as they get less for Flaherty to the Dodgers than the Blue Jays got for Kikuchi going to the Houston Astros. Now, part of that is the medicals. Apparently the Yankees were in on Flaherty, and then the medicals kind of scared him away. And so the Tigers, kind of at that point, you're just left getting what you can get. I like that they didn't trade Skubal, because this is a team I still think that has a bright future. And Skubal's a really big part of that. But to not get what you were looking for out of a Jack Flaherty is really disappointing on the Detroit side of things. I have the Mets as another loser. I don't think they did nearly enough to bolster their pitching staff. With Kodai Senga going out now for the year probably, and it doesn't seem like this is a pitching staff that is going to be overly competitive here in the National League. And this offense has really turned around in the last little bit, and I would have liked to have seen maybe one more bat get added to help boost that, and I don't think Winker is that guy either. So it is disappointing to see what happened with the Mets, because I felt like they were in a real spot to take advantage of a couple very good months and what looks like a pretty good baseball team. So we'll see what happens with the Mets here down the road. And the last one, the Colorado Rockies. They make a couple of minor moves. They don't even trade away free agents Cal Quantrill and Elias Diaz. And so, again, they just kind of stand pat with a team that you have a couple players who maybe won't be back. And even if they are coming back, you still could have got something for them and then signed them in the offseason. There is such a lack of a clear direction out in Colorado right now. And I think this trade deadline and this trade period really highlighted that. So those are the winners and losers from the MLB Trade Deadline. Let's shift gears now and talk some football, as the CFL is getting ready for another week. So it's time for Power Rankings. All right, CFL Power Rankings going into week 9 already. The next time a CFL game will be played will be in August. It's wild how fast 2024 is moving. All right, let's start with the spoiler alert for number 1, maybe. Let's start at number 9. It's the Edmonton Elks. They make the change at coach a couple of weeks ago, and now it sounds like they're making the change at quarterback as Trey Ford steps in to try to take full advantage of another opportunity as another quarterback in front of him has just completely fallen off. It is very frustrating to see how long it took them to make this decision. And I said it, I was on the CFL this week on the Ticats audio network. I don't think what's happened in Edmonton is McLeod Bethel Thompson's fault. That being said, I don't think he should play another down for the Elks this season. I think this year is kind of gone. I think you need to see really what you have in Trey Ford here and see if you can start to build a future around him and work it that way, because it's not working with the guys who they keep bringing in ahead of him. At 8, I still have the Hamilton Tiger Cats in at number 8. Yes, they put on a good performance, but it was against Edmonton. So I'm still not moving them super high on this rankings. But the real highlight so far this year for Hamilton has been Bo Levi Mitchell. And they're starting to figure some things out. Tim White is starting to get things going a little bit. And so I think that leads to a little bit of optimism out in Hamilton, and they will probably continue to move up these rankings as the season goes along. At number 7, it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They continue to fall. They continue to struggle. They actually didn't look that bad last week against the Toronto Argonauts. It was just turnovers that killed them. 4 turnovers ends up putting them behind the 8 ball. The defense played really well, albeit against the Toronto offense that is struggling, but they really had a tough time moving the ball against, or I guess they didn't really have a tough time moving the ball. They had a tough time moving the ball into the end zone, and that's been a problem for this team all season long. They have a really tough one against the BC Lions this week. At 6, it is the Calgary Stampeders. They got whooped on by the Ottawa Red Blacks. This defense continues to be a major problem spot for this group. And the offense has been really hit or miss all season long. And that has been the story of Jake Maier his entire time with the Calgary Stampeders. It's just been hit or miss. And it's been a lot more miss than hit with him. So, they would be lower. I mean, this is how power rankings works. They'd be lower if there weren't worse teams than them. But it's just I didn't want to put them at 6. 6 feels still too high for me for this team. But I couldn't justify putting Winnipeg ahead of them right now. At 5, it's Ottawa. They're moving into the are they for real conversation. The defense stepping up. It seems like maybe they have a couple more game breakers on the defensive side of things than we thought. And offensively, Drew Brown is starting to come into his own a little bit and starting to grow. Again, talked about this on the CFL this week. This isn't an elite team by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a good football team. And it's like we talked about in the preseason, an improved team from what we saw a year ago. At 4, it's the Toronto Argonauts. Again, they had a real difficult time moving the football against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but this is the defense that I thought would show up all season long. You get Serezna back on the defensive line. Winton McManus is a beast. They had players it was playmakers all over the field making plays on the weekend, and that is the type of a defense that I think they can have. If that offense can get anything figured out, this is still one of the best teams in the Canadian Football League. At 3, I still have Saskatchewan. That was a collapse and a half against Montreal last week, but it's still like they completely collapsed and still had the ball with the chance to win late. And if a guy just doesn't step 1 foot out of bounds, then maybe they win that game. So this is still a very good football team. An interesting test for them this week, but this is still a really, really good football team as they go try to be the first ones this year to figure out Trey Ford. At 2, it's the BC Lions. They get the bye week this week. A lot of talk about Nathan Rourke, but the quarterback they have right now is probably going to win the MLP. So this is still a very, very good football team. And at number 1, it's the Montreal Alouettes. Davis Alexander comes out of the random Madden name generator and into our hearts with a tremendous performance. Can he keep it up? We will see. Cody Fajardo off the 6-game injured list. We'll see what that means. But this is still such a tremendously crafted football team, and one that I think is going to be a real problem going forward. So those are your CFL Power Rankings for this week. Let's move into some fight talk now, as there was a seismic shift in the UFC's welterweight division. What did it mean for the pound-for-pound rankings? Let's take a look. All right, UFC 304 is in the books, so it is now time to go over our UFC pound for pound rankings. I guess they're kind of a power ranking, but this is on the men's side. Coming in at number 10, he bumps down a few spots. It is Alex Volkanovski. I still have this guy in the top 10. Because like the two big losses that he had were to Islam Makhachev, who is very high on this list. The Topuria loss stings as well, but I have Topuria high on this list, and I just think what he did warrants him being on this list. But fairly certain he's going to be bumped off of this one pretty soon. Coming in at number 9, I still have Leon Edwards. When you have 2 wins over Kamaru Usman and a victory over Colby Covington, you still get to hang around on the list as a non-champion. The man who just beat him comes in and makes his debut in our pound-for-pound rankings as Bilal Muhammad checks in at number 8. It was a tremendous performance against someone who was ranked pretty highly in these pound for pound rankings. And so he has the long path he took to this championship, forged a true championship level fighter, and has really made him someone deserving of a pound for pound spot. At number 7, it's John Jones. He falls down the rankings due to inactivity and a large amount of frustration around him not wanting to fight Tom Aspinall, who comes in at number 6 after another virtuoso performance. This was one of another. It was one of in a long line of impressive performances for Tom Aspinall with a knockout victory over Curtis Blades. He is cleaning out that division at an alarming rate and is turning into one of these stars in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And then at 5, it is Ilia Topuria, just one of the true talents in this sport. At 4, it is Dricus du Plessis. His run to middleweight glory could be coming to an end in a couple of weeks against Israel Adesanya, but for right now he is at 4. Sean O'Malley jumps up into the 3 spot as he gets ready to headline another card coming up this fall. At 2, it is Alex Pereira, and number 1 remains the same. Islam Makhachev is still the pound for pound king in the UFC. So on the men's side, so a lot shifting down in the bottom half of these rankings, and actually quite a bit shifted throughout, but the top 2 remain the same, and smart money is they'll remain the same for a while. All right, there is a huge boxing card coming up this weekend, as it is Terence Crawford getting back into the ring in LA. But one of the big stories around this card isn't just a pound for pound great is back in the boxing ring. It is how many good fighters are fighting on this card. So this is not something we do a whole lot for boxing, but let's take a look at the undercard fighters you should be paying attention to coming up on Saturday from LA. All right, Terence Crawford is back in the ring this weekend. Crawford versus Madrimov. But that is not the only big fight. And normally we do these for UFC cards, and quite frankly, we don't for boxing. But this card is too stacked to not do this for. So, here are some of the undercard fighters you should be paying attention to coming up on Saturday night. First, it is Isaac Pitbull Cruz facing Jose Valenzuela. Cruz went the distance against Tank Davis. He's now defending his WBA Junior Welterweight Championship. He feels like a real up-and-comer. Yes, the loss to Tank kind of stings, but he is really working his way into being a bright star here at the welterweight division and in junior welterweight and in this area. He could have a huge fight coming out of this, whether it is a Tank rematch or some of the other guys kind of in that sphere. He is someone who I think has an opportunity. He has the skills, and now he is going to have the platform to move himself into a really big tier in the boxing world coming up with a big performance this weekend. The other one, or another one, sorry, is not just fighters to watch, but fight to watch as Andy Ruiz takes on Jarrell Miller in the heavyweight division. Ruiz upset the apple cart for a couple of years with a win over Anthony Joshua to win the heavyweight championship. He then lost and has been trying to work his way back and, quite frankly, build up his reputation after a really frustrating loss to Anthony Joshua. While Miller is coming off of his first career loss to Daniel Dubois. These are a couple of really interesting potential fighters in the heavyweight division when you look at like 18 months from now, Joshua, Wilder, Fury, Usyk could all be gone. These two, I don't think they are going to be leading the charge for the next wave. We might get into that in a little bit here. But these are going to be two guys who I think are going to be a big part of the next wave of heavyweight fighters as this era kind of winds down. The next fighter is David Morrell as he takes on Radivoj Kaladvik. Apologies on the name. This one for the vacant WBA light heavyweight championship. Right now, Morrell is the super middleweight champion, and he can add a pretty high-end name to an interesting discussion at light heavyweight if he moves in and puts on a convincing performance. He has already gone 10-0 at super middleweight. It seems like there is a bit of a rocket attached to this young man right now. And again, this is such an amazing platform for him to be able to fight on and try to build that name up. So all of a sudden, a win here, he puts his name into some of the conversations for fights with guys like Benavidez and Beterbiev and Bivol. Those are the names that we are looking at and the type of names that we could be looking at anyway, with a strong performance from Morrell coming up this weekend. And then speaking of heavyweights, we are back in the heavyweight division as Jared Anderson takes on Martin Bakoy. Anderson is up and coming American heavyweight, so that's why there's a bit of a focus on him. Bakoy, number one ranked heavyweight contender by the WBA. Again, as there is a new wave of heavyweight potentially coming in with the old era starting to work its way out, these are a couple of guys who have an opportunity and a showcase here to put on an impressive fight and really show what they are made of and build up that star potential going into a really interesting fight card and a really interesting time for the heavyweight division. So those are some of the boxers to watch on the undercard this weekend. Also, it is SummerSlam weekend as the WWE gets ready to take over Cleveland, and the PLE, the Paul Levesque era, has been going for quite some time, and I've noticed there are a few lessons that old Triple H has learned from his time down on NXT. It's not just developing talent, it's developed the head of creative for the WWE. I've noticed a few lessons he's learned. Let's talk about it. All right, WWE is getting ready for SummerSlam this weekend, and it is another example of a big show being put on by Triple H, Paul Levesque, and I think this is a time to kind of look at what did he learn in his time in NXT, and how has he shown that here on the main roster? Because we are in this kind of Paul Levesque era, and as I said before, NXT not just for developing in-ring talent, it's for developing everyone in WWE, including their current head of creative. So let's take a look at some of the lessons that Triple H learned from NXT. The first one is when you have a hot storyline, you throw everything at that hot storyline. And we saw that with a number of different ones in NXT, where you would have, whether it's a big title feud, Adam Cole just in the Undisputed Era in general, Kevin Owens being a big factor in things. When you have something, it can kind of swallow everything up. And a couple of examples that we saw here in the main roster was obviously the Bloodline, where that just took over everything, and it kind of sprawled into a number of different areas and a number of different storylines, and that elevated a lot of talent. And that is the other big part of it, is that there is such a way that you can do this where instead of the NWO just burying everyone, this is the Bloodline elevating Sami Zayn, elevating Jimmy and Jey Uso, because of like how much it just kind of took over all of the other storylines. And the other one here is the Money in the Bank with CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. And I talked a while ago about why I thought that was actually a smart decision to do that, because you'll already have a number of different projects on the go. Money in the Bank maybe isn't going to be as impactful on the men's side because you are building up Priest and Gunther and Uso, and a few others that I'm failing the Wyatt Six and Solo Sikoa and all of those guys. So instead, use it as something to further one of your big storylines. And so I think that it can sometimes come at a bit of a cost and there can be some collateral damage, but when they have a main storyline that is the focus, they are going to put a lot of focus into that, and sometimes it can swallow everything up. The other one is, it's kind of twofold. You can come back from losses, and that he has learned how to build people up quickly. One of the unique things about NXT is that there was a constant churn of talent going through there. And so one of the things that was interesting was like, okay, and this is another one of those, when you have a hot storyline, it can kind of take over. So say you had a Finn Balor who is on a roll and on a roll and on a roll. Well, he can go out and he can beat a Andrade or an Apollo Crews or whoever. I'm sure my timing is off on some of these, but just understand what I'm saying. He can beat those guys because eventually he's moving up to the main roster and those talents are going to have a bigger spotlight. And so you can kind of make people forget about those losses. And he has kind of done that with some main roster stuff where there was a few times where you would have some talent where it's like, boy, that seemed a little quick to beat them. Braun Breaker, for example, that seemed a little quick to beat that guy. Well, they have continued to build him up, and they have been able to get him into a spot where he probably should have won the Intercontinental title before, but he absolutely has an opportunity to do that now. And you look at like the amount of times they beat Jey Uso, again, getting swallowed up by the Roman Reigns storyline, but his time in that main event spot will come as Roman Reigns exits, as Jey goes to another show. Now you build him up in a new way. And so there's a lot of times in wrestling we get worried about beating a guy too soon or beating a guy too much, and you absolutely can do that. It is a fine line, but I think one of the things Triple H learned in his time with NXT, part of it by necessity because of the constant churn of talent, is that you can beat some of these guys, but there is still a way to elevate them then to the main roster at a different point. And the last one is not everyone needs to be on every show. As of right now, SummerSlam is a 7-match card. And there are probably going to be some big names not on it, but you can use that in a way to highlight the SmackDown and Raw before, the Raw and SmackDown after, and put those big names on there. It keeps people fresh, it keeps storylines fresh, and it makes it feel like there is something new constantly happening. NXT takeovers, they were like 4 or 5 matches. And then, yes, you have a couple other key storylines that are heating up on their way up to it. Maybe you reference them on a takeover. Maybe there's a video package. But then you put them on NXT the week after and the week after and the week after. And all of a sudden, those shows feel like they are pay-per-views or premium live events or whatever, because you have these pay-per-view level rivalries that are still building up. And you kind of, instead of having a 15-match card, you have an 8-match card and then spread out the other 7 throughout the rest of the weeks, and it makes those shows feel important. And so I think Triple H, you can really see some of the ways that he learned from NXT and how he has now incorporated that into his work on the main roster. All right, that is going to do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you want more fight stuff, I was on Sportsnet 960, The Fan, yesterday doing a breakdown of UFC 304 with Aaron Bronstetter. Some really good stuff in there. I really enjoyed that conversation. So go check that out on the sportsnet.ca, on sportsnet.ca/960. I referenced it a couple of times. CFL this week, I was on the Ticats Audio Network, so go check that out now. Thursday, Friday, I'm going to be on Sportsnet 960, The Fan, 3 to 6 on Thursday, 1 to 4 on Friday, and then Friday here on these channels, it is going to be Terence Crawford preview. We're going to have a WWE SummerSlam preview, and we're going to have a Football Friday as well. So tons to get to throughout the next few days. Thank you all so much for joining me. Follow me on social media at Primetime Klein, and I will talk to all of you later. Have a great day, everybody.